Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AuthorHood podcast. Hope things are being beautiful at everyone's end. Gracing our show today is Mr. Bryan Esparza, who's an author, writing for over a decade now, capturing the highs and lows of high school and college life with authenticity and depth. Drawing from his own experiences, he infuses his work with relatable moments, making his stories resonate with readers navigating the same journey. His series, That's Life, is known for its approachable and engaging style, offering a candid look at the triumphs, struggles, friendships, and self-discoveries that shape young adulthood. Through his writing, Bryan not only entertains but also provides a sense of connection and understanding to those experiencing life's formative years. Hello, sir. Thank you very much for accepting the invite. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it.
That was from my end. How will you best introduce yourself to the listeners?
Of course, yeah. So, hi, my name is Bryan Esparza. I'm 28 years old and I'm from Seattle, Washington. Myself, I've been writing for just shy of 20 years, and I currently have 4 published books. I can also be a little long-winded at times, but trust me, it all ties in. As far as my writing journey is concerned, as a child, I grew up being a big fan of professional wrestling. I used to go to a lot of live events. I've seen people like John Cena or Jeff Hardy, the great Khali. The list goes on, and to this day, I still follow the business.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was around the ages of, I was around 9 or 10. I started to truly accept and understand that professional wrestling is more of a choreographed or scripted event, you know. While the child in me was a little disappointed to come to this realization, I started to think about it, and it overall gave me a newfound respect for wrestlers and the performers of the shows that they were on. And it actually sparked an idea in my head of, I want to write some short stories about my own fictional wrestling promotion. I thought that would be kind of cool. And so at that young age, that's what I was doing. I would make these little 2-3 page stories. And mind you, at the time, I was a homebody. I didn't do the best in school. I liked sports, but I couldn't really play them too well. I was a TV and video game nerd, but one day my dad saw me writing a short story and he was like, "Oh, is this for homework?" That's 5 pages to paragraphs. And when he discovered that I was writing these for fun, I showed him all my previous documents and short stories. This light bulb went off in his head, like, oh, my son is writing in his spare time. So he gave me a proposition.
Okay.
If I could write a complete novel, that was at least 100 pages. It has chapters, flowing, all that. He'd find a publisher for me.
Wow.
Yeah. But at 12 years old, I kind of looked at him and I was like, I'm going to make a lot of money. And of course, I now know that it doesn't quite work that way. I write for a variety of different reasons, but those were my humble beginnings. And when I was 16, I was a junior in high school. I was a local skate park kid. And like most kids that age, I started to dabble and experiment and get exposed to trying substances, like alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, things like that. And one of the required readings I had in my one of my language arts classes was a book called Go Ask Alice. It was a book about a drug-addicted teenager her life spiraled out of control and she runs away from home. And it was presented as a real-life diary of a drug-addicted teenager. Now, the only problem with that book was it was a complete hoax and it was a work of fiction, but it was being presented as a non-fiction book.
Okay.
Yeah, the author herself, Miss Beatrice Sparks, was a Mormon youth counselor. She herself had never done a single drug in her life, as far as my research could find. So as the writer of this book, she couldn't relate to a teenager like Alice at all. And yet she feels like she has the right to present a factual portrayal of a of drug usage and addiction by interviewing these teenagers and presenting the work as her own and that it's real life, while the book itself is fictional. So I was 16, and for one, it made me very upset that someone felt that they had the right to talk about something that they had no personal experience with.
Very true.
Exactly. Myself, I had never done anything outside of the substances I mentioned earlier, but that gave me the overall theme to Attitude, my first book, and the books following, which is you can't write an accurate representation of something without going through it yourself. So I decided to write a book based on myself, a story about high school. It was a story about high school, but it was told from the perspective of someone still in high school. You know, present day, I'm 28 years old. I can't really tell you what I was thinking at the time because it's been over 10 years since I wrote it. But if you had asked me back then, or just read one of its many chapters, it's kind of like a time capsule to what a teenager's mindset could look like at that time. And quick little fun fact, it was drafted, edited, and published within 12 months.
Wow. Did your father had a hand behind that too? The editing and...
Yeah, so what happened with him was that I presented him the draft and he kind of saw it and he's like, well, I'll pay for editing, I'll pay for any of the services that you want to an extent. You know, he wasn't going to drop thousands of dollars on it, but if you could figure this out on your own, I can help, you know, pay for any financial things that get in your way.
Big thanks to him on the very first hand.
Yes. Yes.
And one thing very rightly put forth, fiction is not really fiction. It's out of experience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you manipulate the experience, you fix it as in how you want, and you present it as a fiction.
Yes, exactly.
That was amazing, amazing introduction.
Thank you.
Okay, so since you got your first book, Attitude, published when you were 16, as you just said, first things first, if you get a chance to sit with the 16-year-old self now and share one piece of writing advice or rather a suggestion, what would it be?
Well, I would first tell him that finding people to review your draft will never get easier. But in all seriousness, I would most likely tell him to consider going back and editing the final act one more time. Because looking back on it now, that was probably one of my biggest fumbles. I could have connected so many different things that I talked about throughout the book, and it would have made the climax and finish a lot better. But to tie it all in general, I would tell him to just be a little more patient during the process. Back then, all I wanted to do was to publish a book. Yeah, it was a boyhood dream, and I was still very young and very stubborn. I couldn't even comprehend a budget for cover art or editors. I mean, just the average price of an editor back in 2013. Yeah, the first quote I got was like $4,000. So we ended up getting my creative writing teacher to do it. I took a lot of shortcuts, and there was a lot of advice that I neglected. And what it taught me at that age was that if you really, really want to, anyone can self-publish a book. It just depends on how high or low your standards are. And do I think he would listen to me? Most likely, due to the nature of who's speaking with him, I feel like it would trip him out to see, you know, himself 10 years in the future trying to talk to him. But yeah, but I can't see my 16-year-old self waiting any longer than an extra week or two.
Again, nicely put. So, the second book, Connection, did writing it in any way made you reflect differently on your high school years, or did it reaffirm everything you originally thought back then?
Ooh, okay. So writing it actually, the big difference between myself and my character, Jason Espinoza, is I actually aged Jason up a year from myself. So when Attitude ends, He is 18 and already graduated. While at the same time, I myself was 17. I had 6 months of my senior year before I got the idea of Connection. And of course, stubborn me, I published it just as fast as Attitude. So I'd say that the writing process was reaffirming a lot of things because I was still in that element. But I actually went back and read Connection recently for the first time in a couple of years. And reading it definitely reaffirmed some thoughts on a number of things, like when Jason got contacted by someone and it got a little messy and how he reacted to it. But present day, I reflect differently solely because I mentioned it earlier in the previous question. I could have said so much more and given detail to so many characters and friends, like especially looking at where a lot of them are at now in life, like Brad, for example, one of the skate park kids. He helped me out with a number of things, and he always had a passion for clothing and fashion. He actually started his own clothing line, Bizrat Clothing, and he's got a ton of hand-sewn pieces. He doesn't skate as much anymore, but he found his passion. It would have been cool to, reflecting on that now, it's just like, oh, damn, I could have really set this character up for that, or I could have talked about, like Chase's passion, give or take. But it's one of those you live and you learn type of things.
So, do you think writing about Jason's journey helped you understand, even for a person, your own past better, or did it feel more like an escape? Since you say that you had that age gap thing between you and the character you were framing.
Jason's journey, I would say specifically, because there's 4 books in the series, but for the Attitude and Connection part of Jason's journey, it helps me understand who I was at the time. Yeah, rereading the drafts before it even got published, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 drafts sitting in my old desktop. I thought, rereading those, I went back to my 16-year-old self. I thought I was so smart and wise, and I didn't know, back then, before I learned everything post-publishing, I didn't know some people refuse to criticize you just to not hurt your feelings or something. When in reality, like I was so focused on, like, I need to get this done, and I need this, like, it's going to be a bestseller, it's going to do this and that. In reality, I was too blind to truly realize that for the first time in my life, I was driven and motivated to do something. Yeah, because like Jason, I didn't want to go to college when I was his age, and at the time, I barely felt I had any talent in writing, quote unquote. It's a very subjective topic, let alone skill in any other hobbies that I had in my life at that time. So that was more of just like understanding my past. But the second half of Jason's stories, that was more of an escape due to the nature of its themes. My own personal need to like flush some thoughts out.
A very fair answer to how you thought and how Jason thought all along. Okay. So, Connection, it explores the behind the scenes struggles of publishing. Like all that we have been talking all through. Everything that you mentioned. What was the biggest misconception you had about becoming a published author when you were ready with Attitude in your hands?
Okay. So the initial shock, I remember it went live July 24th, 2013. It was late at night. It was like 11 p.m. when I hit approve, and then I go to Amazon and it's there for sale. And there's no way it's that simple and quick because, mind you, I self-published with almost zero knowledge of the industry. I discovered the website not even 2 months earlier, and I'm almost positive I didn't even order an advanced copy before approving how the book looked or anything like that. So yeah, my dad ordered a copy and it came in the mail a few days later. I realized when I was looking at it, like, oh, there are no limits, As long as your document and cover fits the correct dimensions and margins of the size that you want, yeah, there are no limits. At the time, I thought, oh, this is Amazon. they're going to help me with this, obviously, or they're not going to accept the fact that you have all of these grammatical errors in here despite the 3 revisions you had. But yeah, it really was that quick and simple, but that doesn't mean I didn't learn anything or took it as a joke. I just kind of saw the book in my hands and I thought, this isn't going to be the last book you write, and you're only going to get better as you continue writing.
I also came through this post on your Instagram handle where you had mentioned that the cover of Connection, it was the Google image.
Yes. Yeah, both Attitude and Connection were stock images I found on Google. Like I said earlier, I didn't really budget or could even comprehend budgeting for covers or editors. And so I kind of had to find ways around it. And, like I thought having a cover filled with smoke or a smoke heart would work best, because I was just like, yeah, it's about a teenager getting exposed to like tobacco and drugs and like little things like that.
The creative head that you had. Wow. I mean, smoke.
Yeah.
Then the connection of the smoke with the addiction and everything. It's so amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So now, Jason, who you made to go through n number of struggles and also made him wait with getting his first book published. Did that change your perspective on storytelling after yourself experiencing the reality of book publishing firsthand?
Yeah, so while the reality of publishing was rushed for me the first time, one, as I mentioned a few times, it taught me about patience, but it also gave me a perspective on storytelling outside of my own genre. I'm a fiction, I would consider myself a slice of life writer. They're all of my storytelling comes from personal experience. So for me, it's just like I have all these memories from like the skate park or soul food books or high school in general, and I just have to be like, okay, I know how these scenes are going to be written, but I just have to plug them into chapters in a way that flows in a story that makes sense. It's not just going to be a bunch of memories, but there has to be a story to it. And that's just how I would do storytelling. But especially now that I'm connecting with all of these different authors of all these different genres, like science fiction writers or true crime writers, but especially like fantasy authors, for example, the amount of world building and character development that you have to do. I was talking to someone the other day. I'm like, you've spent 6 months just world building, and you haven't even started the first chapter yet. That's incredible. And I look at some of the stuff that they do, and like your minds and the way that they work is just crazy to me. But yeah, that's something that was missing from my early days of publishing. Yeah, overall, I just learned to be more patient with the process, and I also have to be more open to feedback and suggestions. When it comes to storytelling as well. And like anything in life, publishing takes a lot of time. And no matter how much time you spend on it, it's honestly never going to be perfect. But if you do take that extra time or take that extra week of editing and you just trust the process, the finished product will look that much better.
Well, everything that you mentioned eventually comes in with time. And not to take it as something like a blunder or so, it actually shaped how you look at things now, how you look at publishing, how you look at an edited draft.
Definitely, it just comes in time, and while each book takes longer and longer to publish and edit and do, I know that just comes from me learning from the past and be like, no, I need to not have the same mindset. I should go back and edit it one more time, or I should let one more person peer review it or give them an advanced copy. You'll still find like grammar mistakes here and there, but especially for those that started with Attitude and then read all the way through to my 4th book, they see my progression and improvement in real time.
Wow. Hence the gap you took after every book. Yes?
Yes.
So, if Jason had to meet Bryan from high school, would they be friends?
If they crossed paths in high school, I think they would definitely be friends due to how similar they are to each other.
Hmm.
The tricky part is both of them at the time were very shy. They still kind of are, but back then they rarely spoke first. They weren't the icebreakers in their friend groups.
Hmm.
Some would say that they were trying to be under the radar
Hmm.
in high school, unless someone like Derek or Savannah was like taking them somewhere.
Hmm.
But I would assume that Derek, Jason's best friend,
Hmm.
would have most likely met his real life counterpart um, at the same time in high school, and then that's how we would connect and be friends eventually. But yeah, they'd definitely be friends.
Just one statement from me. Every character counts.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, did any teacher or classmate who saw your efforts for attitude and who ever read connection, did they make any guesses of Jason being you?
Yeah, there were a number of people. So I'll give you two examples. I'll give you one of my teachers and a local mom. So
Okay.
most of the students who read or at least tried to read Attitude at the time, they made the automatic assumption due to the similarities in our last names. My last name is Esparza, Jason's last name is Espinoza.
Hmm.
They made that assumption already that
Okay.
we were the same person. But
Oh.
I published the summer leading into my senior year, so I would promote the book by just letting it sit on my desk. And
Hmm.
someone would ask about the cover, or I would read it to myself, and then someone would eventually want to talk about it. So in September, beginning of the year, new instructor,
Mhm.
I was sitting next to one of my friends, and he was trying to convince someone to buy a copy or something. And
Hmm.
my teacher walks up to me, and he had a big smile on his face, like looks down at the book, looks at me, looks at the book, like, "Oh, that's your name,"
Hmm.
like, "This is your book," like, and I banter with him a little bit, and all he knew was
Hmm.
that it was based on personal experience.
Hmm.
So I gave him a book, and the very next day after I gave him a copy, he saw the new copy on my desk, and he was like, I'm already a few chapters in.
Yeah.
And I look at him, I'm all excited, like, "Oh, what do you think?" And
Hmm.
he had this blank stare, just, "I know way too much about you already."
Hmm.
And
One statement, yes.
yes. And I just kind of laughed it off, and I was just like, "Well, thank you for reading." It was the first like adult shock because I have a very raw, straightforward sort of writing style. Like, I don't beat around the bush. I don't care if my teacher reads it. I don't care if my parents read it. Like,
Hmm.
this is who I am and like what I'm going to tell you about. But it was the first time I experienced shocking someone with my writing, and it was very interesting. About a month later,
Hmm.
a local mom read Attitude, and
Okay.
she had texted my mom. She
Hmm.
texted my mom. They were acquaintances. They would go to like parent-teacher stuff kind of things. But my mom was like, "Yeah, she sent me a text asking if this was real," and I told her, like, "You can tell her
Hmm.
that Jason Espinoza is based off of me, but that's all. That's all you can say." And so she tells her that, and so this mom sending my mom these paragraphs of like she's so shocked to learn about the teenage activities in Redmond, and like she was so shocked that she actually she requested to have a sit down talk with me,
Wow.
specifically about her son, and the peers that he hangs out with. Now, I'll say it right now. I don't snitch. I'm not here to say like, "Oh, Brad's real name is this," or "Derek's real name is that." And I still stick with that to this day. I want to protect them as much as I can, especially for those that want to keep their privacy. But yeah, I don't snitch. But I told my mom, like, I'm willing to talk to her, but if she's expecting me to like name drop some things or just basically release some people's private information, that's not what I'm going to do. And so my mom relayed that message, but she never came around to it. And I just assumed that mom had bigger and more important things to worry about.
It's 100% true thing that mostly parents, they don't know what goes around the lives of their children. And
Yeah.
reading a book that's so raw, coming straight from a person who's experiencing everything.
Yeah, the thing is, the book is just my perspective and what I was exposed to.
Hmm.
I didn't really hang out with her son.
Hmm.
I'd heard his name and I knew some people that he hung around with, but I don't know if they were doing the same stuff me and my friends were, or if they were getting into some harder, more dangerous stuff.
Hmm.
And so, yes, I would have been willing to talk to her, but if she's going to ask me, like, oh, is he doing like
Hmm.
marijuana? Is he doing like crack or something? I don't know. Like, I wasn't going to have that. I wasn't going to have that conversation with her.
Believe me, I'm so surprised that a 16-year-old had that much in his brain that he confidently said that I won't, release any personal information or anything like that. I mean, had it been any other
Yeah.
kid, they would be like, wow, I got a chance.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, this could be very basic. What is that one thing about high school that you think adults will never fully understand? Now, because since we talked about this mom, I guess the question makes sense.
Something that adults will never fully understand about teenagers. I'm an adult myself now, and looking at like my cousin, for example, like
Hmm.
and the stuff that she's going through. She's about to enter high school really soon. While the dynamics and social structures of high school have changed a little bit in the
Hmm.
decade plus since I've been there, something that I feel should be universal around this topic is you will never crack the code of high school when it's always going to be filled with hormonal 14 to 18-year-olds who, at the end of the day, whether they're a cheerleader or a loner or like an artist, they're just trying to find their way.
Yes.
For a lot of them, the social setting becomes everything they crave or
Hmm.
everything that they despise. So at the end of the day, they're going to react the way that they are. Adults have to understand that teenagers are going to mess up. They're
Hmm.
going to experiment. They're going to get arrested. They're going to say some out of pocket, inappropriate, or wild things sometimes. And hopefully, somewhere in that chaos, they're going to find their niche and find, like, this is what I want to do, or this is what makes me happy, and this is what my craft is going to be. But most importantly, adults have to understand that in high school and public schools in general, um, the system exposes kids to the valuable lesson of not everyone is going to like you. You're going to have bullies. You're going to have acquaintances. You're going to have good friends. You're going to have fake friends. List goes on. And it's a lot to process at such a young age. And their reactions are going to be pretty wild at times.
True that.
Yeah. As the adults in their life, you can teach and guide them through each mistake the best way that they can. But the key is, like I said, your child is going to make mistakes. But as a parent, it's just your job to make sure that their mistakes keep them from harming themselves or others.
True.
It's completely valid to lose your cool with them sometimes because we all have our limits. But just like I would tell my younger self, we could all use a little more patience in our life and decisions, whether you're a teenager or an adult. But the cycle continues as I get older. And it's like I said, they will never fully understand.
Very, very, very beautifully put.
Thank you.
Wow. Believe me, sir, I knew that it was going to be super amazing to know you around. Like how you thought then, how you think of it now. It's wonderful.
Like I mentioned, a lot of the questions that you've been asking, like they're questions that I've never been asked before. So it feels good to, I've always had these thoughts and I've always known how to answer them, but it feels good to finally be able to like say them out loud and affirm like all of my like previous thoughts.
Thank you very much. So looking back, what was that high school moment that felt small at the time, but ended up bringing out the writer in you?
Oh, yeah. So As I mentioned, Attitude was edited and revised by my creative writing teacher. And yeah, Jennifer, if you're listening to this, thank you again, and I hope life's been good to you. But funny thing is, I hired her my junior year, but I didn't take that class until senior year after the book was published. My friend Shyla tipped me off to her mainly because of how laid back she was about certain topics for narratives. I was afraid to approach a lot of my past language arts teachers because I'm going to give them a book about myself that exposes me, their former student, about doing drugs and all this extra stuff. I didn't know if they would be okay with that. I didn't know if I'd be reported to the school. There was a lot of worries, but apparently with this creative writing teacher, like she didn't really care. So she edits the book, and then I'm in her class senior year. One day she taught us how to do what are called streams of consciousness. Yeah, it's the act of sitting alone in your room or just in a classroom or whatever, no distractions, and it's just you and a notebook. And suddenly it's like you hear a pin drop in the room, and she would say a random word, or you'd hear a sound outside that breaks the tension, and it causes you to write the first thing that comes to your mind. You know, like I heard one time I was doing one of them, and there was a loud engine that started up, and I immediately started writing about Derek. Derek was super into cars, you know, lowering the cars, camber kits, things like that. And so I wrote about how fascinated I was to learn about, you know, like car modifications and stuff. But if someone could hear, someone else might hear the roaring sound of the engine and think, oh, damn, that reminds me of when I went to the street races, and let me write about that. So it really kind of taps into your brain, you know, a certain sound or a certain word, and it really shows you where you can go with that. And so she taught us how to do that, and a few months later, I was going through some breakup troubles. First time in my young life, and so I didn't really know who to turn to or what to do. And at this point, she knew me personally. And so I was venting to her in class. I was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it today. I'm sorry if I'm not attentive. And all she told me to do was, hey, don't worry about your classwork today. So for about 45 minutes straight, I did a number of streams. It was maybe like 10 whole pages. And in those streams of consciousness, I was able to figure out, rereading my writing, why I was so upset, you know, what makes me happy, you know, like why that relationship was such like a big deal to me. And all of this is coming from like the sound of like a skateboarder spinning his wheel as he's walking by the classroom or something. And it just reminded me that, yeah, I write and I want to publish more books in the future, but writing in general, there are way more benefits to just writing for yourself that I need to stick with, because it's obviously a great tool to keep myself mentally in check and kind of see where my true thoughts are.
I am going to make every student that comes in my contact and is feeling not very sure, I'm going to make that child listen to this conversation.
Oh, sweet.
Really?
That's amazing, actually. Yeah, because my creative writing class, I still look back very fondly on that, because there were so many like acquaintances and friends that I took a class with that I had never seen them write before. And especially when we did streams of consciousness, you know, I'm like, just like, I think she said like sailboat one time, and I just kind of wrote about, you know, the old man in the sea, because I was reading that at the time, and I'm like, damn, I can't even swim. I can't imagine being out there. And then I look over at my friend, and I find out like, oh, your family owns a boat. You've actually set out to sea. You know how to sail. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that about. It's an incredible tool to use.
Amazing. This is so wonderful. So wonderful. Now, for you, what was the most unexpected lesson learned about people, friends, family, and strangers? And the reason behind me asking is, how is it any different from what Jason observed as a teen?
So what Jason observed as a teenager, he was a skate park kid, and as passionate as he was to, you know, like film videos and make montages and put them on YouTube and things like that. It was still sort of a negative place to be around. He understood that not everyone there is your friend, but that was the skate park's way of saying hello. It's compared to what Jason observed as a teen. When I was 16, I was still very young at the time, but I learned through this publishing process and everything that people will bald-faced lie to you, but more importantly, they won't read or listen to you. I started campaigning to classmates and teachers like, hey, I wrote a book about myself and the locals, like, would you be interested in reading it one day? Because I wanted to gauge interest. I wanted to see, like, I'm going to do this regardless, but it's just like, are people actually going to want to read it? Now, when I do this, I still have the same mentality to this day. I respect anyone who is open and honest with me. If you gave me a simple, like, oh, dude, I'll support you, but I don't think I read it. I don't read books. That could work great. I mean, I get it. I don't read too much myself. I focus on my writing and other hobbies. But anyway, friends, classmates, teachers, they all showed a lot of support. And as time passed, maybe 2 months into being published, I started to notice a pattern. There was a pattern with a lot of kids that got their own copy. So it would always kind of go like this, I'd bump into someone and be like, oh, you're Bryan, right? Like, dude, I loved your book. It was great. It was so great. And, it just makes me happy a little bit. And just like, oh yeah, what'd you like about it? What's your favorite scene? Who's your favorite character? And it would be the most awkward 15 seconds of our lives. Because they'd either they'd have nothing to say, or they'd scramble to tell me something random, like, oh, I love how you portrayed the skate park's attitude. And it's just like, yeah, you like the skate park? So what do you think about Andrew? And be like, oh, dude, he really helped bring the park together. He's great. And then I would stop them and I'd be like, no, Andrew is a member of the Soul Food Hippie Gang. He is not part of the skate park gang. And then I would just walk away. So to shorten these interactions, I would continue to get them like, oh, your book was so great. Like, I loved it. I loved reading it. I would ask them, who's Derek? I wouldn't ask them, who's Jason? Because Jason's too obvious. It's me. But I would be like, who's Derek? That's Jason's best friend who has an entire introduction on the first chapter. And yet they can't even tell me who he is, obviously, because they just lied to me and never read it. If you're going to read it or feel like critiquing, but you don't want to critique it because it's negative, or maybe you just want a copy of my book to say like, oh, I know him, he personally signed it, that's great. I love and appreciate everyone that has at least tried to read any of my work, but just all I ask is that people are honest with me, because there's no sense in lying to the creator of the book when you can't answer a simple question about it.
Especially when the creator himself or herself was so open to know what the other person thinks about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what's that one thing about your books or your writing journey that you wish the people around you who saw you writing noticed, but they somehow missed it?
So there are two things that I try to include in all of my writing. One of them is a little more obvious, so I'll start with that one. I have yet to find another author that does this with their chapters. And if any of you know someone that does, please send them my way. But every chapter in all of my books, they have a name. Yes, I figured out that a lot of authors have trouble naming their chapters. But each chapter also includes a quote from a random character that's involved in said chapter. I'm super big on teasers and previews and brain ticklers. And so by including a quote that may not make sense when you first read the chapter title, my goal is to kind of like tickle the reader's brain of being like, how is that relevant? Or like, why would he put that there? And it like piques your curiosity, that by the time they do find that quote in the middle of the chapter or something, I've gotten people to react to that sort of like, aha, like type of moments, like now it all makes sense, like the build was kind of worth it. And the second thing that I like to include is, as a nod to my youth and humble beginnings, I always try to include some sort of reference to professional wrestling as well. whether it's mentioning something like shoot interviews or pipe bombs or using all those terms to describe certain scenarios. I can't see myself writing about the business because I myself have never been involved outside of being a fan. The entertainment medium of wrestling deserves its flowers in my writing, one way or another.
I guess I need to manage John Cena and everyone in the community listen to this.
Yeah, so it'd be cool to have a wrestler listen to it. Would be peak.
Actually, they need to know. They need to know a fan talking. Okay, so if you could rewrite your high school years as a novel with a different genre, maybe mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, or any other, what would it be?
I have got this question in the past, but I've always had this thought. It's always been kind of like running around, but then I'm a pretty big realist, and so like I would think about this all the time, and I would then remember I'm so fixated on realism and such that putting any sort of genre twist on it, especially on a book about high school, would be a very big challenge. But I like challenges, so if I had to choose one, it'd be a tie between mystery or science fiction. Again, I would find it pretty wild to lump Attitude or any of my works into a different genre, but for one, I think a mystery sort of twist would be fun to play around with. I'd have to add like an overarching plot to Jason's life, like who's responsible for screwing with all of his decisions, or is it really Dagon who's the root of most of his social issues, or is it Jason? Is he self-sabotaging? And yeah, now I got all these ideas and plot points in my head, but if I were to go all in and like completely off the rails and do a completely different spin on it, I would probably choose science fiction. While it's not my favorite genre to read, and I can't even think of an example of any of my previous writings related to the genre itself, I've always considered co-writing a book with someone, and so I've always wanted to collab or do something. One of my good friends and fellow writers, Johnny Cabellos, he's super big into science fiction. He's just getting into the publishing world, like multiple works in progress. And I mentioned earlier about world building and like the time and process it takes for writers to just get that done, let alone start the draft itself. Johnny is one of those guys who can really build a world and like connects all these different plot points. Like his Forsaken series on his Substack is doing really well right now. But anyway, while science fiction is uncharted territory for me, it would get me out of my comfort zone, and I'd be collaborating with other writers, which is a goal that I have for this year.
Just the other day, I was reading about J.R.R. Tolkien, and
yes,
I don't know why, but I am, seeing the two people sitting together.
I'm sure Johnny would love to sit down with him and learn a lot, but yeah, it's
okay. So, was there ever a moment where you thought about quitting all the teenage drama? Since you have written it, you have experienced all of it, that's all your go through talking. If so, what pulled you back into the game?
Okay. I guess the closest I got to quitting was when I got sued. Sorry. I was threatened with the law.
Okay.
Yeah, right after publishing Attitude, my dad ordered 100 copies for me to distribute to the locals, and I promised everyone involved, like, if you have a character, I'll give you a copy for free. Like, thank you for agreeing to this, like things like that. So the 100 copies came, and when they came in, I like made the announcement, like Facebook, Twitter, and I understood as soon as I made that post and people were looking at it, like, everyone's a critic. Some will support you, some won't at all, but it's in Connection, it's actually chapter 26. Connection was supposed to have a completely different storyline and like how things were supposed to flow, but it's because of what I wrote about in chapter 26 that connection became what it is today. And again, before I go into the story, it has been over 10 years. I hope that the real Amber is living the life she wants. But anyway, Amber was Derek's girlfriend.
Okay.
The character Amber, while it's mostly based off of the girlfriend that he had in real life, there are certain references I make to, some of his past flings or past girlfriends, things like that, because they still happened in the time frame that I was writing about. But it would make the most sense for Derek to have one consistent girlfriend. So the books came out, and the girlfriend messaged me after I got the 100 books, and she's telling me how scared she is to read the book because she didn't want to learn about Derek's past. She finally expressed, and I say finally, and it'll make sense in a second, but she finally expressed that she didn't like the fact that I made references with her character alluding in real life to Derek's previous relationships. And she was, I think, protective. I knew about how Amber was in real life, and so I knew about this going in, but like everyone else, I had asked her for her consent. I shot her a text when it was still being published, like, hey, as you know, I'm publishing the book, like, are you okay with this? And she said yes. And I mentioned earlier that people don't read. I mentioned her, like, are you sure? Like, do you want to go over the certain sections that I talk about? Do you want to go over this? And she said, no, do whatever you want.
Okay.
So I did whatever I want. And so here we are now. It's published. I have to promote it and do all these things. And she's now suddenly like not okay with it. And she wants to know what I wrote about. And so like any 17-year-old kid, I was dancing around the topic. I was taking forever to respond. And she finally got the message, and she tells me everything's fine. Everything's fine. Like, I would love to read it, but I'm too scared. Have a great summer, Esparza. Like, I'll talk to you later. And not even 5 minutes later, Derek is texting me, calling me, like, dude, she's super mad at me. And she was telling him all these lies, saying that, yeah, you said that, like, you told her that her character isn't even based off of her. It's based on all of my previous relationships. And within 20 minutes, I'm suddenly screenshotting conversations, like going back and forth with both of them. They're both telling me to take the book down and re-edit it, despite the fact that they had refused earlier. I had given them multiple opportunities to do so before I got published, and suddenly now it's not okay. And I kind of looked at it and I'm like, damn, within 20 minutes, I'm suddenly beefing with my best friend. And it was typical high school drama,
Typical high school drama, yes.
Yes. And so I confronted Amber about the lies because Derek made the decision, like, we're not brothers anymore. Like, we're not friends. Like, basically screw the past, like, 6 years. Like, you're not doing this for me. And I was like, and so I confront Amber about it. And I'm like, why would you lie to him like that? Why would you tell him a completely different story? And she went on to tell me that she just thought it's messed up what I did. Like, how would you feel if I wrote a book and I had a girlfriend of yours, screwing with other guys? and I'll never forget my response, because I was like, well, for one, I've never had a girlfriend, so I can't relate to that. But number two, if I did and you did something like that, I would have the common sense to understand that that is her past. I can't change her past. I can't change the fact that she had previous boyfriends before me. As long as she loves me and cares about me, like I know Derek cares about you, obviously. He just kicked me to the curb. I gave her that shield, and then that made her even more pissed off. And she hit me with the classic, did you know it's illegal to solicit information and use likeness without their consent? This is a suable offense, and I hope you know I'm pursuing that. And I hit her with, something that the kids say all the time, like, damn, that's crazy, because I do have your consent. Here's a screenshot of our conversation. Here's this and that. As looking back on it, my 16-year-old self would have loved to label my work as nonfiction, because it's quote unquote real, like, yeah. But I did have to change not only names but the results of some outcomes in certain scenes to make the story flow a little better and things like that. And by doing so, that means that the book's fictional. You can change the names, but if you change certain outcomes, that's kind of where you blur the lines and you're like, it's not an actual real portrayal of a nonfiction. it may sound like Bryan Esparza from Redmond, Washington, but it's actually Jason Espinoza.
Uh,
And so I go through all this heat, and
hmm,
at this point, I thought I just achieved my dream,
hmm,
and only when it's finally said and done, people are
hmm,
now voicing their complaints. It's expected, but I just blew up any sort of bridge that I had with Amber. Derek's not talking to me. I just lost my best friend of almost 5 years, and this stuff is hitting too close to home.
hmm,
And again, this was 10 plus years ago. I loved Derek. We're still friends and Sluff Squad to this day. But at that point, I thought I had like two options.
hmm,
I either take the book down, I either take it down, re-edit it, save the friendship,
hmm,
or it's my senior year. I'm gonna do my own thing.
hmm,
Derek and Amber, their relationship will sort itself out, and we're just gonna lay low. We're gonna stick with the people that I'm already friends with, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to make new ones. And we were still neighbors.
hmm, hmm,
We weren't gonna hate each other. We were gonna keep it casual. There's just like this tension between us.
hmm,
And what pulled me back in? Well, the big freaking thing is that I published a book. So I went from Derek's quiet friend to, oh, that's that kid that published a book.
hmm,
And
hmm,
so people had all these questions. I still had to promote it. People wanted copies. I had to sign it. I had a book signing coming up. And I also got a girlfriend at that time, which could, that in general pull me into more high school drama at any moment.
hmm,
So I couldn't fully escape the drama, even if I tried. But at the end of the day, once Derek and Amber went their separate ways a few months later, we made our peace with the situation, and
hmm.
I was more than happy to have my friend back.
Wow, Amber. Wow, Derek.
Yeah.
Too nice. Too nice. Though I haven't read the book, sir, believe me, I'm enjoying
Oh,
every bit of it.
oh,
Honestly.
thank you.
Yes, it's like standing at the door
Yeah.
and looking at the tableau going on.
Yeah.
Wow. So, if attitude and connection were to be adapted into a film or series, sir, what's that one scene you would insist be done exactly as you wrote?
Exactly as I wrote. It would be, yeah, I mentioned earlier, like back then, I wasn't really big on descriptions. I was very straightforward. So exactly as I wrote it. Um, in Attitude, there was a fight scene, a pretty big fight scene. There's a whole chapter dedicated to it,
Hmm.
where these kids from out of town were messing with one of our locals to the point where they like almost broke his nose and everything. And they claimed that they were going to come back
Hmm.
with like even tougher people, like MMA fighters and stuff. And so the brother of the person, that he said, I'm going to truck them in the face, like on site, if they come back. And trucking is when you take your skateboard and the trucks where the wheels are, the metal part, that's when you swing it like a baseball bat
Hmm.
at someone. That scene in general, like I remember when I first released Attitude, the locals would come up to me all the time, like Esparza, that's not how it went down. That's not how it, I was like, well, do you even remember? Because we all had different memories of it.
Hmm.
Because it was a
Hmm.
very hectic time. Very hectic time. Some of us were like sitting observing, some of
Hmm.
us were swinging, some of us were like put in headlocks. But for someone like me, I was, as one of the filmers, I usually film stuff like that. But
Hmm.
it was just so chaotic. And the way that I wrote it, especially at that time, because we were still young, I'm like, do you guys really want me to write it the way it went down? Because like I could jeopardize a lot of things here.
Hmm.
We're still young. I don't know who's going to read this, but in general, that was probably where I put most of my description, most of my detailing was in that
Hmm.
chapter. And so if it was made into a movie, I would at least want to be on set for that scene specifically.
And anytime in future, if you get a chance to direct, please do the Derek and Amber scene.
Oh, yes, I'll do that 100%. It's,
Yeah. Okay. So, if Jason were to write his own book within connection, what do you think its title and theme would be?
So I think he would title the book Inception, mainly because it rhymes with connection, and
Hmm.
he'd want to pay respects and give a nod to the book he originally belongs to
Huh.
if he didn't already include an acknowledgement page or something.
Hmm.
And his theme would be everyone has a perspective.
Hmm.
Try to understand it before judging someone. Jason's perspective could be different than mine because we are still two different people.
Hmm.
We're similar, but we're different people. And I'd like to think his book would be a more internal look into his thought process and his future specifically.
Wow. This sounds to me as if Brian and Jason, they're going hand in hand.
Hmm. Yeah, very subtle differences, but we do go hand in hand.
Okay. So, do you think Jason would be any different from you now when you both are nearing 30? How and in what ways would he differ?
I think he would still be chasing happiness would be a big thing because that's all he wanted in his life.
Hmm.
Whether it was trying to find it at the skate park or wherever Derek was taking him at the time, he'd want to find happiness. Um, by now, I'd like to think that he would have found happiness.
Hmm.
His story still needs to be finished, but similar to the substances he was exposed to at a young
Hmm.
age, he would have found happiness definitely, but he would understand now that he's pushing 30 that happiness is just a high. Dopamine, if we want to get specific,
Hmm.
but I'd like to think he understands that he's going to be chasing that high his whole life if he
Hmm.
allowed himself to do so. And that would be the main difference between us. Me, myself, I've learned to be content with my
Hmm.
life. Like I'll always be chasing happiness, but I'm kind of okay with what I'm doing. It's not exactly where I want to be, but it's a pretty good routine. I like the people that I talk to and things like that. But that would be the main difference between me and Jason is I think he would still be chasing the high, the dopamine high,
Hmm.
until he either peaks, whatever that looks like for him, whether his story pops off or whether he goes off to college and like finds something for himself.
Wow, again. It's that one conversation that actually brings 1,000 different things to head all at once. How would this
Yeah.
have been? What is the person doing right now? How's the person now? What would Jason be doing now? Like, I have so many things to ask.
I mean, Jason he would probably be trying to kick his vaping addiction. That's the big difference between me and Jason is that we were both really big hookah smokers back then.
Hmm.
We both eventually discovered that we weren't addicted to marijuana. We weren't addicted to, tobacco or anything. We just liked the act of smoking. We
Hmm.
liked the act of like blowing clouds and things like that. The only difference was that when new studies came out and like smoking hookah actually is as
Hmm.
bad as I thought it was going to be, a lot of the locals tried to tell me like, no, it's not the equivalent of smoking like 200 cigarettes a day or something. Like, well, it kind of is, it's not being filtered. While I chose to quit, Jason continued to smoke hookah. He continued to, hit
Hmm.
vaporizers and electronic cigarettes and things. So he'd probably be trying to figure out like what the next step would be for that because he wants to. By now, he'd want to prolong his life. He wouldn't want to like, take X amount of years off of his life just for that one extra hookah session or something. He'd want to figure that out.
I don't know whether I'm allowing myself a lot of freedom, but I'm making myself a part of the series, and I'm the counseling psychologist there.
Yeah, yeah. He's already making all the plot points and all that. Like,
Okay. Now, to so much of Jason and so much of Brian, what would be that one bonus statement that would go from Brian and Jason each to the listeners?
okay. I'll start with what Bryan Esparza would tell you. So, from me, to whoever's listening, I just want to tell you guys and also sort of remind you that At the end of the day, I'm literally just a guy. I currently work a blue collar 9 to 5 job. I still have roommates at 28, and I wouldn't consider myself prestigious or famous for my writing by any means, but I do it because I love it. And people always told me that I'm a good storyteller, so that was a boost of confidence. So if you were like me at a young age, wanting to start writing, like I'm finding so many writers now that are like 13, 14, they're trying to write their books and build TikTok followings and things, but you're worried about how it'll turn out. Just know that millions of people have that same thought every single day, but starting is better than thinking. Even a first draft that sucks, quote unquote, in your eyes, despite the fact that you took 8 months to write it and you may feel like a waste of time or something. Spending 8 months writing your story is significantly better than spending 8 months thinking about writing a story. And if you don't think you have a single supporter in your writing journey, you'll always have me, and feel free to message me if you need advice. Also, Rush Acacia and Go Kooks. If Jason were here, he'd tell you to do what makes you happy and screw anyone else that doesn't agree with your decisions, even if he himself or Bryan Esparza doesn't like what you're doing. Do what you love for you, whether your passion is skateboarding or writing or cooking or wrestling. Find your niche, and at the end of the day, worry about your happiness and well-being.
Wow, Bryan. Wow, Jason. Thank you very, very much, sir, for maintaining the difference in both the personalities all through the conversation. It was so wonderful to know who Jason is and know who Bryan Esparza is. Amazing it was.
Thank you. This has been quite the experience. It's been a great time.
Well, grateful I am that I got to connect with you, and thank you very, very much, sir.
Of course. Thank you for your time.